This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Erie to Philadelphia, from Scranton to Pittsburgh, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined by my co-host, Maura Donnelly. Maura, welcome.
Hello, Charlie.
So you just got back from the from the Pennsylvania Society in New York City.
I did.
And
I live to tell.
Oh, my goodness. Well, there's a lot of interesting developments regarding the mayor. You've heard about this?
Yes.
The mayor, one of his first targets was to do away with the horse-drawn carriages in Central Park. Mm-hmm. And then he retreated from that, and now he's back at it.
Yeah, well, that was very popular, so I'm not surprised.
And the next thing I heard now that the police are actually circulating a petition that they are asking if any of them are killed in the line of duty, they don't want him attending his funeral.
Oh, my gosh.
They don't want him attending their funeral.
Yeah,
this is very interesting because Rudy Giuliani, of course, attended all the funerals of all the police and firemen who died in 9/11. So some interesting things. You were right in the middle of them.
I was right in the middle of some protests, too, so that was...
Were you really?
That was interesting, yes. Yes.
Well, to wrap up the year and wrap it up in a very good way, I think, we have Dave Patti with us, who's the chair and the CEO and president, excuse me, of the Pennsylvania Business Council. Is that right?
Good morning.
Oh. And Dave, thank you very much for joining us again. Sure. What we'd like to do is we've done with you before, and that is we'd like to question you about some of the things that have gone on this year and looking to the new year, what we might expect in Pennsylvania politics. And we have a fishbowl here with...
See, we're reviving the annual tradition.
Yes, yes. It's a great way to end the year.
That Maura prepared, but I have no idea what's in there.
Well, that makes two of us.
Maura, I'll rely on you to draw the first question.
I get the honor sign. And so just to be clear, you don't have any idea what these questions are, correct?
No, we could have cheated and the viewers wouldn't have known, and I'd be okay with that.
Yeah. We're not going to cheat. We are going to say, what are the hot business issues going to be in 2015?
Oh, actually, a good question, and one that we're asking the CEOs who make up the business roundtable right now, the same question. Workforce and related to that, education very much at the top of a lot of people's list. From the employer perspective, we often use the word workforce. Others might use the word education. They're one and the same in my mind, are certainly two parts of a very broad subject, an important subject. Both getting the right people, ending what's perceived to be a skills gap, that we can't find the right people to fill jobs, but also a lot of people who are concerned, and I'm sure the incoming Wolf administration concerned about how do we pay for basic education, K through 12 education in our schools. And so I think there are a lot of related topics that will be very important there. Of course, everyone knows that we're entering the new year looking at what will probably be a tough budget cycle. Knowing that the state looks like it may have a deficit of as much as $2 billion for next year. So wondering how is it that the General Assembly and the Wolf administration would work together to close that hole is, of course, a great concern and interest to the business community, wondering is it going to be tax increases, spending cuts, some combination, how do we do that? So I think those are big things. I mean, pension reform is something we will keep pressing for. Public pensions, that is, that how do we do something about that huge unfunded liability?
Okay, great. Those are some big issues.
Very big.
The new governor is spurring a renewed interest in taxes. What should businesses across Pennsylvania do? Should businesses do anything at this point?
Well, we want to see what he proposes. I mean, I think everybody understands and accepts that the rhetoric and the discussion during an election cycle, during a campaign, might be different than what you get once you start to move to governance. And he's going to have to also temper what he wants to do against the fact that there are overwhelming majorities of Republicans in the Senate and the House. He discussed something both when he was a revenue secretary under Governor Rendell and in the campaign called mandatory unitary combined reporting, It sounds like something you would take penicillin for. It is an incredible amount of paperwork. It essentially says to the government, here's all the business activity we have everywhere. You decide how much tax you want to take on that, no matter what state it happened in. And it's a paperwork nightmare. Frankly, it would not generate any revenue in the beginning for Pennsylvania, any new revenue. As people sort through what does it mean, there'd be a lot of litigation. But it's something he's had an interest in. He discussed during the campaign trying to move to a more progressive tax for the personal income tax, where the more you make, the more you'd pay. Constitutionally, there are some challenges to doing that. There might be some workarounds, but that would be difficult. And for the business community, where that becomes troublesome is what we call pass-throughs. Small businesses that are sole proprietorships, joint ventures, LLCs, S corporations, subchapter S corporations, that get taxed at the individual rate. Obviously, they have more money, but that's the business, really, income. Mm-hmm. It gets passed through as if it was on their personal income taxes. And so that would be increasing the tax on small businesses.
Okay. All right, let's see what else we got in here. This is so exciting.
I like these so far. Wonkish and straightforward.
Okay, here's a fun one. What is your favorite Christmas cookie?
I'm an old standby, Toll House.
Toll House? Really?
Yeah.
Nothing with sprinkles on it? No frosting?
I really don't like sprinkles.
You heard it here first.
Yes.
He doesn't like sprinkles.
Oh, let's see. Okay, this is a good question that we definitely wondered about anyway. What issues will the Pennsylvania Business Council focus on in 2015?
Well, pretty much the same as the first question. I mean, we're going to look at workforce and education. We're going to look at pension. How do we drive down the state's liability for pensions? Because meeting that liability is eating the budget. So whether you want tax cuts or more spending, it's not there. Because public pension liability is so taking that away. We will be keeping an eye on tax policy, making sure the capital stock and franchise tax is finally done away with, trying to make continuing reforms on the way in which we do a tax appeals, which is both good for the state and good for the taxpayer to just resolve those things more quickly and more fairly. Probably continue to say, what is it that we can do to move forward with the expansion of our energy industry in Pennsylvania. And a lot of that goes back to a law passed a couple of years ago, then somewhat turned down by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, Act 13, which got into, among other things, how do you site facilities and pipelines, and that would also mean transmission lines for electrical transmission. Whether we generate electricity or bring oil and gas out of the ground, we have to get it to the markets. And resolving how to do that in a way that protects the environment, protects human safety, but gets those pipelines and those transmission lines in is very critical.
We've been hearing about pension reform for so long, and it seems like one of those issues that should have been resolved a long time ago. Do you think something actually will happen now? Do you think it has to happen?
You do get to a point where you get to a crisis, whether it be bridges falling down or taxes being so unsustainable that people leave the state, that finally everyone agrees something has to be done. Yeah. I don't know if we're quite there with pensions yet, but I suspect we are.
We're not in crisis mode?
I'll tell you, where we are is with the municipalities. The state is not, frankly.
Okay.
It's very, very uncomfortable for the state, but we're not. Our cities and our boroughs are.
Okay.
And we've got to do something about them as well.
All right, you haven't mentioned this yet. Do you think there will be a tax on Marcellus Shale?
Certainly during the campaign, you heard Republican candidates also running saying it's time for a severance tax, or they'd be willing to entertain the idea of a severance tax. Devil's always in the details. What does that actually mean? How do you do it? Does it replace the impact fee? Are you going to take money away from communities that are getting money now? Right. I mean, the way the impact fee was, the impact fee had a little killer provision in it that says, if, by the way, we ever do a severance tax, this automatically expires.
Right.
Now, the General Assembly could rescind its own rule.
Yeah, they can make a new law.
They can make a law that says forget about the other law.
Could they do a combo, partial, reduce the?
In theory, anything's possible. Yeah. The politics of it are difficult, and there's some other ideas moving around. But the other thing is, too, I mean, with as we know, oil prices have been plummeting, which is generally a good thing for everybody. But natural gas prices were following oil prices. They are down. Mm-hmm. So at a certain point, if the price that they can charge for gas is going down and the cost of producing when you add the taxes in is going up, you stop drilling.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's not going anywhere. So some people will say tax it because it's not going anywhere, but the other reality is they can wait 10 or 20 years to take it out of the ground.
Yeah.
And we don't get the taxes or the jobs.
Okay. The suspense, Charlie.
Well, I'm thinking that looking that Dave looks more and more like Johnny Carson. I look more and more like Ed McMahon.
Well, I know.
I'm looking for the great Karnak.
If I'm going to get the hat here soon, yeah.
Rapid fire. One sentence on each.
Wow.
What's the future of Kathleen Kane?
Bleak.
What's the future of the Senate of Pennsylvania?
Status quo.
How about the House of Representatives?
They're going to have a good time this year.
Oh.
Good answers.
Yes. And lastly, what about Senator Pileggi?
Dominic Pileggi, I can't do this in one sentence. He's one of the finest people I've ever worked with. I first worked with him when he was Mayor of Chester, and he was dealing with charges of environmental racism in the city. And he took what could have been a powder keg issue in the late 90s and just handled it with, as you would expect, a very cool, calm demeanor that handled everything very, very well. I think he did a great job as a majority leader. Change happens. And his caucus decided that they wanted to go a new way, and Jake Corman is going to be a great leader. But I think Dominic still has a long, good future ahead of him, whether it be in politics, in the private sector, whatever he wants to do.
Okay. What should Governor-elect's Tom Wolf's top New Year's resolution be? Not a good sentence structure, but...
In the last 2 minutes.
What should his New Year's
I would beg him to stop talking about going to MIT and Dartmouth.
Stop mentioning Dartmouth?
Yeah. I don't think we know. I think we all know where he went to school. I think he will be well advised to remember to keep an open mind and for a while, some closed lips and listen and take it all in and then move forward gently and slowly and deliberately.
One last question, quickly.
Okay. And we have 30 seconds. Can Governor-elect Wolf make education a priority without raising taxes?
Well, yes, is the simple answer, because there are a lot of elements to education. Yes, people think they want to have more money to spend, but also where's the accountability for the $27 billion we spend now? Let's make sure we're getting the most out of what the taxpayers are already putting into it. And let's talk about, is the money allocated among the 500 school districts well? And you can do all of that without raising.
Well, Dave, we made it. We got through all of the questions, Mara. That's quite an accomplishment. Yeah. I want to thank you very much for coming in with us today and joining us for the show. And happy holidays to you.
To both of you too. Thanks.
And we look forward to seeing you in the new year, Dave.
Very good.
Okay, we'll be back with a second segment right after this. Stay tuned.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions to make the commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Express, transporting construction, farm, and industrial equipment throughout the United States, and by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back to Behind the Headlines. On this segment, Mara and I are joined by the president of APSCUF. Of course, APSCUF stands for the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculty. And of course, APSCUF has been here with us. You've been here with us before, Ken, and your predecessor, Steve Hicks, was here with us. And we appreciate your being willing to come on and talk about higher education in Pennsylvania. And happy holidays to you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here, Charlie Mara. Happy holidays to you, too.
Well, it's always interesting to see what's going on in higher education and how this is influencing the Commonwealth. Let me start out with your particular organization. APSCUF looked very smart in that you were perhaps the first large statewide union to endorse Governor-elect Wolf as he was seeking the Democratic nomination and then the governorship. How does that look for APSCUF?
Well, we were very fortunate. We had Tom Wolf come and visit with our organization. I think there's an affinity there because, he does have a PhD. He went to MIT. He's a very, very smart man, and he showed that. We were in a position where we really endorsed him on the basis of we really think that this is someone who's smart, who's going to be good, generally good for the Commonwealth and good for public higher ed. We didn't expect anything from him. We never asked him for anything in particular, and we're looking forward now to being able to work with the administration, but also work with Patti, the state system of higher ed, to do good things for the students of
Someone
Pennsylvania.
who understands higher education.
Right, he understands higher ed. He served on the Council of Trustees or something, their similar thing at York College, so he had some experience there too. When he came to speak to us, he did have some knowledge of our issues too and what our concerns are. We understand too that we're not going to agree on every single issue that comes along, but we believe that the new governor is someone who believes in public higher ed. And given what we've gone through over the last several years, that's extremely important to us.
Is APSCUF involved with the transition teams at all, or are you going to be submitting any information to the transition teams?
Well, we've been in contact with members of the transition team, and we're going to talk about those issues and our concerns about the state system, how it operates. We have some very particular concerns related to the specifics of how they do their business. We generally are concerned, though, and the thing that, we think shapes everything about public higher ed was the fact that under Governor Corbett, we received that $90 million cut. And ever since then, we've seen two phenomena going on. One is that there are cuts at the universities and programs, important programs, cuts in numbers of faculty, services to students are going down, and at the same time, the students are paying even more. So really, we have a situation where, if we're going to be honest about it, the students are paying more and getting less for their money. We believe in public higher ed, and that is that, that model where the students contribute a fair share, but are not paying the overwhelming amount of the cost of their education is an important one to maintain, because paying for public higher ed is not just something that's good for the particular student. It is good for the Commonwealth overall. Those students contribute to the economy. We are all better off with an educated citizenry. So public higher ed remains something that's really fundamental. On top of that, in the communities where our universities are located, if we're just going to look at it as far as jobs and things of that sort, we're in places like Clarion and Slippery Rock and Edinburgh. Our universities are sort of the center of business in those communities, and when you rob those communities of the money going to the universities, it not just hurts the students, it also hurts the surrounding areas too.
Well, certainly the tone between the Corbett administration and higher education seemed to have been set by that first budget that came down from the Corbett administration regarding higher ed that had envisioned the just deep cuts, and your organization, APSCUF, working with lots of legislators, were able to turn a good portion of that back. Do you have any idea what is APSCUF doing to work with Governor Wolf so this first budget that he'll have on higher education might set a better tone between the administration and the higher education community?
Yeah, you mentioned that initial budget. That initial budget had a 50% cut in it. That was the recommendation of the governor. It was the legislature that reduced that to 18%, which is still a pretty sizable cut. 18% only looks good when you compare it to 50%, but that 18% has had ramifications at the universities. We did manage to work to fight that back. You mentioned that we work with legislators and others. I think we also have to really mention the students who showed up at the Capitol building, spoke to their legislators about it, and really made the case. Right now, we're in communications with them. We are trying to make the case that the system needs additional money. The system itself, for the first time in a long time, is asking for additional funds. They're asking for $50 million more than what they are getting now. We're not content with that because that $50 million covers the sort of the gap that exists right now with no other expenses accounted in. So there's any increases at all, the $50 million doesn't cover those increases. And it certainly doesn't cover any of the cuts that were made to various different key programs at the universities. So we're trying to make the case that we need that at least the $90 million back. If we were going to be trying to get back to exactly where we are, we'd have to be asking for much, much more. But we want that. We believe we need the $90 million back so that we could deliver on the promise of a quality public higher education to our students, which we're required to do. But we're going to go one step further, and we're asking not just for the 90, we're asking for $110 million. And the reason why we're asking for $110 million is that we think with that $110 million, we could say to the middle-class families in Pennsylvania, look, you suffered, you paid more, you deserve 2 years of a tuition freeze. So the students have seen 7% in that initial year when there was the cut, and then 3% every year since 2011. So I think it's time to give a break to the middle class, the working families of Pennsylvania. That's who we service. And we believe that every student, every family should have a shot at the American dream. And part of that American dream has been that you get a college education so that you can advance and that you have a chance to make a good living. And like I said before, it's a benefit to the Commonwealth too, both in terms of what those people give back in terms of tax dollars when they have better careers, but also in terms of the fact that we have better citizens. We're a more educated society, and there's certainly, I would hope nobody would argue that that's a public good.
Well, Governor-elect Wolf is going to have a really tough first budget coming up in the spring here, and faced with a deficit and a lot of people lining up to say this is what we would like. Mm-hmm. How are you going to make the higher education funding bubble up to the top of his priority list? I mean, you've made a lot of arguments here, but what is the one thing or two things that make you deserving to be at the top of the priority list if there is going to be additional funding added to any programs?
Right. I think that, attention has to be paid more to what's actually happened at the universities. The cuts in student services, the cuts in important programs, the key things that people took for granted at their universities. At some of the universities now, people would go back if they were alumni, they wouldn't even recognize what's being offered there. And I think that some of that's just bringing public attention to what's going on. But I think there's a very clear case, and the data supports this, that it is penny-wise, pound-foolish to not invest in public higher education. That is, we see numbers like the return being, anywhere from 6 to 8 times the amount of investment you get back in return when you invest.
The governor would.
I would hope he. Yeah, I would hope that he would understand, and I think he does get that. On top of that, and he has mentioned it several times. I've heard him that the colleges that we have, the universities that we have in Pennsylvania, should be seen as a resource that we can use. Mm-hmm. And if we want Pennsylvania to be recognized as a quality place to bring businesses in and to succeed, you need an educated workforce. And there's a lot of room for partnerships. There's a lot of room for innovation that relates to universities being the center. And I believe that if, with investments in public higher ed, the returns include that we have better jobs coming to Pennsylvania too. And I'm not the only one, like I said, who believes that. There's data that supports that too.
Ken, some of the cuts that you've talked about have manifested themselves in, for example, some of our universities in the state system are in the process of dropping courses and majors in areas such as philosophy, music, and the languages. When does higher education cease to be higher education? How far can one compress these different bodies of knowledge and still represent yourself as a college or a university?
And I think you've hit the nail right on the head there, Charlie. If we're looking at cutting back on key programs, that is the things that people assume are part of a higher, college education, then we're not, we're hurting ourselves when we go ahead and do that. We can give out degrees, and say and try and cut corners and deliver less to our students. But when those students go on the job market, when they're involved in interviews and they don't know basic things that you're expected to know, if they do get a job and they don't have the kinds of backgrounds that they would need to solve problems, to be critical thinkers, the very things that business leaders say that they want from students, we're doing all of Pennsylvania a disservice. And we've suffered through that. I hope that, I think that our universities still do a great job in delivering higher ed to our students. But clearly we cannot withstand much more without cutting back and hurting those students and then ultimately hurting Pennsylvania.
Well, we've spent a lot of time talking externally, what you're going to be looking for, what your needs are. We're ending 2014 here. What is APSCUF's New Year's resolution going to be for your members?
Well, I mean, our New Year's resolution, I think, is the same every year, in that my members, of course, we represent faculty and we represent coaches too, and that is that we want to give our students the best possible education and help them in their futures. And everything I've said so far, I think, relates to that, to being able to deliver to them. We want the best for our students. We want Pennsylvania to be the best place to go to college.
Tim, we only have 30 seconds left. This is your first year of serving as APSCUF president. How have you been adjusting? What's it like? Any thoughts?
It's a pretty diverse job, doing many different things involved with government, involved with education policy, and the rest. But I would just say that I feel privileged to be able to represent the quality faculty that we have at our universities and our quality coaches too.
Maura and I are privileged to have you join us, and we thank you for that. And we hope that you'll join us again next week for a new edition of Next year, actually, you're right, Maura, for new editions of Behind the Headlines. Don't forget to check out The Voice of Pennsylvania. The Song Parlor has been back with John Patterson for a few months, and there are a wonderful holiday selection of songs for you there to hear. We'll be with you again next week on Behind the Headlines.